Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Session 3, Building Social Connectedness in a Physically Disconnected World. I am Susan Ryan. I am the Senior Director for the Greenhouse Project, and we are delighted to bring you this 6-part series. We believe that it's a highly relevant topic. I can tell you that for me, during the time of lockdown and quarantine, was one of the toughest times ever. We are hardwired for connection, and it's really been so interesting to unpack it from different perspectives. Our session today is really all about the importance of the role of technology and what the role of technology can do. And I think, this all fits so beautifully with our theme for the year, which is Go Beyond Better. How important it is to really leverage everything that we've learned amid a pandemic to figure out what can we do to go beyond better. And so we invite you to do that along with us. Logistics, on the next slide, we'll just take a look and invite you to introduce yourself in the chat box. You will find the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to know who you are. Introduce yourself. Engage with us. You can certainly make comments in the chat box during the presentation today. In addition to that, if you have questions for our speaker, I would invite you to put those in the Q&A box, and we are saving time at the end for you to get those questions answered. This session is recorded, and you will be given a link. A link will be sent out to you that will have all the PowerPoint slides and so forth along with that recording. So before I introduce our sponsor and our speaker today, I'd love for us to do a poll, couple questions. And so Janet, if you'd launch that poll for us. All right, our first poll, pre-COVID, how often would you say that your residents felt lonely on average? So this is a single answer, but I invite you to participate. If you take just a minute and put your answers down, really want to hear pre-COVID, before the pandemic, how often would you say your residents felt lonely on average? Couple more seconds. All right, Janet, you can stop the polling. And there we go. So 50% said that your residents felt lonely 50% of the time, and this is pre-COVID. Janet, can you launch that second poll? How feasible is it for your community to use resident backgrounds and interests to personalize the care and engagement? So when you're wanting to personalize care and engagement, how feasible is it for your community to use their backgrounds, their preferences, their interests? Is it very feasible, neutral, slightly feasible, or it's impossible? So I'd love to have you weigh in on this question. How feasible is it to incorporate resident background interests, preferences to personalize care and engagement? Thank you so much for participating in the poll. It's always helpful to our speakers. It's helpful to us as we contemplate, future sessions and so forth, and to really understand how big and far and wide the problem really is. Okay, Janet, you can stop the polling. And the results. So 38% said it's actually feasible. Another 33% said it's very feasible, and not one said it was impossible. So that's very encouraging. So I want to invite Jack York, my good friend and supporter of the greenhouse model. Jack, it has been just the best decade of my life and beyond to really get to know you and to be able to work with you in this capacity. So thank you so much on behalf of the Greenhouse Project for your support with It's Never Too Late.
Well, and Susan, I just got instantly nervous because I saw in the chat that both Carrie and Al Power hopped on. So now I'm going to get a little bit more formal, I think. But anyway,
That's good.
you and I have been talking we've been talking this for 15 years as people that have watched these before, just about the whole power of engagement and the pratfalls of isolation. And you know, it's unfortunate that something as tragic as the pandemic brought it to life, but obviously a series like this speaks volumes as to just the importance of it. And so it is very meaningful for us to be a part of this. We love how IN2L fits with the Greenhouse Project, and I'm particularly excited to introduce today's speaker.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thank you so much for your support.
Well, one thing too, do you notice how clean my glasses are?
I did notice that.
It's because I have a Greenhouse Project. We have glass wipes that we do have a limited supply available. So if we get on the chat that you'd like a wipe, a Greenhouse wipe, we will send them to you. Al Power, you need one.
Thanks, Jack.
Uh-oh, it's all me. So is it time for to introduce our guest speaker?
It is time. This is your moment.
Okay, Karen, come on. Put your face on, Karen. So anyway, it's been I'm thrilled to be doing these introductions to speakers, and it was great having Ann Montgomery on a couple months ago and Emmy last month. But this one is very personal to me. Karen O'Hearn is the IN2L. I'm going to read a little bit of the formal bio. Karen O'Hearn is the Vice President of Product Management for IN2L. Blah, 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 blah. 30 years of experience, a nurse by training, all kinds of very sophisticated, just juice to her resume. I can read this whole thing, but you know, trust me, it is an incredible resume that she has. I want to say two incredibly cool things about Karen. The first is that, or three things. One is that Karen has just brought a gravitas and a process to how do we develop the right products that in our 21 years we never had. And I really do want to commend Karen for that publicly. And just a little bit to speak to her character is rather than just trust her instinct or rather than try to figure out what the heck is the right product for IN2L to be developing, she went out. How many communities did you go to, Karen?
We went to 4 communities where we actually moved in.
Yeah, so she moved in for a couple days at multiple communities, got to know the residents, got to know the staff, and this is well before the pandemic, obviously, and that's really helped drive the direction of where we're going. And I just think that's so commendable to take that much ownership. The second thing is Karen, and she'll never talk about this, she is like the most awesome photographer. She goes all over the world taking pictures, immersing herself in cultures all over the world, phenomenal pictures, she is the Renaissance woman right next to Susan Ryan. So with that, we'll turn it over to the meat of the presentation. Karen, thank you for being a part of this series, and from the bottom of my heart and from Tom and Leslie as the other co-founders, we just thank you so much for what you've brought to IN2L.
Well, Jack, thank you. That was really generous, and for all the grief we were giving you for the nerve-wracking introduction, I couldn't be more flattered, so thank you. So I think we want to pull up the slides now, so let me get that set. And let me know, are those sharing?
Not yet.
Okay.
Here you go.
How are we? We're good?
Yep, you're there. You got it.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, listen, I'd like on behalf or in extension, I think, of Susan and Jack to really extend a warm welcome to those of you tuning in today. I really appreciate, I know how valuable an hour of your time is, and I'm excited to share the results of this market research. They're really insightful, not only in shedding meaning to this past year, but as important, what it tells us about loneliness and social isolation pre-COVID as well. And I think that insight is really critical in understanding our opportunities going forward. And we anticipate you'll leave the webinar today with concrete ideas of how to leverage technology for impact for your residents, your families, yourselves, your staff, and your communities. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. I want to start by setting the broader context for the issue we're talking about today. Even before the pandemic of this past year, social determinants of health, and especially those of social isolation and loneliness, they were getting a lot of attention by virtually everyone, whether it be senior living community execs and operators, healthcare providers, payers, public health officials, the press, etc. But for really good reason. It's estimated that 70% of the variance in healthcare outcomes is attributable to the social determinants of health. So it's a big deal. And no wonder that it was a significant priority even before COVID. Specifically, I want to talk about social isolation and loneliness, these topics that we're focused on today. These are widespread areas of concern for the senior population that have negative impacts, not only on overall health, but socially and emotionally as well. And I think, as Susan referenced, we're all feeling that from the type of restrictions, quite frankly, we've had over the past year on socialization. According to AARP, 1 in 3 US adults are lonely. And I'm sure that we've all seen the statistics now that the effects of prolonged isolation are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Isolation and loneliness, they're connected to health outcomes like anxiety, sleep disorders, falls, cognitive decline, and symptoms of depression. And really what loneliness does, it diminishes the effectiveness of the immune system, and you have significantly higher risk to succumb to really serious diseases, as you can see on the slide. I mean, 29% increased risk for coronary artery disease, 64% increase in dementia, 32% increase in stroke. So very significant if we can only intervene at the level of social isolation and loneliness. Now they do mean different things, so I just want to spend a minute and actually tease that out, because we oftentimes use them interchangeably, like I have been in these sentences. Jack had already commented that I spent much of 2019 doing market work in senior living communities on this issue. And it was really apparent in speaking with residents that many were lonely despite being surrounded by others. And I heard repeatedly things like, you know, it's difficult to make new friends. I feel invisible. Nobody asked me about my life. And I just was stunned by that. I was like, how can this be? How can you be lonely when you have all these gatherings with your neighbors day in and day out? But while social isolation is the actual lack of a social network, so it's that objective measure of the number of contacts that people have, but loneliness is the perceived lack of meaningful relationships. It's the gap between a person's desired level of social contact and their actual level of social contact. And loneliness, you can imagine, we certainly none of us desire that state of being. So more than ever, communities are grappling with the realities of resident loneliness and struggling to create meaningful social connections for residents, not only to manage times when in-person options are limited, but also to fully address the ongoing and the pervasive issue in the long term. So while pandemic conditions have made this issue more pressing, communities must prove that they can do these things at all time, whether it's response to the seasonal flu that often necessitates restricted visitation, or even just during a regular week when family and friends simply may not be able to visit in person, or for those residents that don't have people visiting them or connecting with them in person outside the staff. So engagement and connection are critical in addressing isolation and loneliness. In fact, engagement and connection are the fundamental building blocks to health and wellness. Connection is that key ingredient to living our best lives, no matter what our age is. We know that by involving elders meaningfully and connecting them to others around them, we create higher levels of camaraderie and engagement, as well as a greater sense of purpose. And these are all elements that are critical to overall health and quality of life. So I want us to think about the ultimate goal in improving engagement and connection is not just eliminating isolation, but in doing so, we're improving the health and wellness of those elders. At I2L, we knew there was an opportunity for us to leverage technology to help communities and elders create these connections, but we first wanted to do additional market research to better inform our efforts and to guide our technology solutions. So in June of last year, I2L, with the help of a research partner, surveyed 3 stakeholder groups on their experiences and perspectives before and during the pandemic. And we got responses from 100 senior living communities. 2/3 of them were CEOs or operators. Others included marketing, biz dev, and activity, clinical, and therapy leads. We got responses from 150 residents. About half were living in a CCRC and the others in assisted living. And 3/4 of the respondents had lived there over a year. And finally, 500 decision-making family members. More than half had a parent or an in-law in senior living, and others cited a spouse, grandparent, or other family member. Now, what the data has revealed is that there are many challenges that are being exacerbated by the pandemic, but also some real key opportunities. And technology is poised to help senior living providers in taking advantage of these opportunities. So let's take a look at some of the key themes that emerged. Our data showed the same things that I observed in 2019. Even in senior living communities, older adults are lonely. There's a few things here, though, that are really significant, I think, for us to pay attention to. Before the pandemic, almost 40% of the residents said they were often or always lonely. So if there's one thing that I want to make sure you walk away from this webinar, it's with an appreciation that this issue persisted long before COVID. And most alarming, though, is during the pandemic, the number of residents who reported always feeling lonely increased by 230%. So I want to go back and look at the first poll that we did at the start of this. And you all were guessing about how before COVID, how many would you say your residents felt lonely on average? And let's compare. You all thought that 5% were always, 40% often, and 50% sometimes. So the percentage distribution was very similar to ours, although the number is different. Now let me take you a bit further and show you what our data actually showed. Really, the results of this show that most operators underestimated resident loneliness in their communities prior to COVID. Now, the bottom data is what I showed you on the previous graphic. So look at the disconnect between what community leaders were observing and what residents reported. Only 1% of the senior living communities thought that residents were often or always lonely at the time, when 40% of the residents were reporting that. But look at what COVID has done to the perceptions. So at the upper top right, during the pandemic, 74% of operators reported their residents were often or always lonely. So what COVID has done is really put a spotlight on these issues of loneliness. And the good news is that there's now increased awareness of and concern for it, but we need to hold on to the truth that this is not new. And it presents a huge opportunity for communities. You can't address what you can't see or you don't know, but we now have newfound awareness of this critical issues for our elders. And we have even more data from our market survey that provides more insight. Facilitating friendships is essential, but unfortunately not happening to the level it needs to happen. Even before COVID, only about 2/3 of the residents were satisfied with opportunities to socialize with friends inside the community or to participate in fun events inside the community. And their satisfaction with the former, being satisfied to socialize with friends inside the community, actually stayed static during COVID. So I don't know if this was as shocking to you as it is to us. You know, interestingly, the survey also showed we had some results from families. And the families had the same perception pre-COVID, but it dropped to just about half during the pandemic. And 50% of the residents told us, as you can see on the upper right, that they have never felt like they had a friend in their community. And 2/3 of them are saying that they very much want to make more friends. So what the data tells us is there's opportunities for residents to connect with others. It's important, but it's not always available. And very likely the gap is around helping elders connect around shared interest. So these are clear areas of opportunity for communities to raise satisfaction for residents as well as families. And in many cases, the families are the decision makers. And it's to not only improve the quality of life, but to prevent attrition as well. And again, the data bears this out. You can see on this graphic that operators agree on the importance of friendship. Virtually all operators responded and said that having friends impacts a resident's well-being. So there's full agreement on that. They also acknowledge that having friends inside the community impacts a resident's family satisfaction with the community. And families echoed that sentiment as you see on the right. In fact, families reported the #1 reason not to recommend a community would be if the opportunities for residents to socialize with each other were lacking. So there's a tremendous opportunity here for action. And this is telling us that our efforts today to facilitate these meaningful connections and opportunities for engagement clearly are not as successful as they could be. And this was critical for us to know, because when we talk about connection as a solution for loneliness, we're talking not only about connecting elders to other people, whether that be their peers or staff or families, but also what interests them. What makes them want to connect to the world around them? What makes them tick? What makes them excited to get out of bed in the morning? So when it comes to fostering connection, we need to be able to tap into what is meaningful to each individual and truly personalize their experience throughout the day to have the most impact on their well-being. And residents and families, they agree with this. Almost 3/4 of residents and almost 8 out of 10 family members say that activities specifically tailored to the elder are absolutely essential or very important to their well-being. So let me go back to your poll results before we go on. And the second poll question, just to remind you, we asked, how feasible is it for your community to use resident background and interest to personalize care and engagement? 33% of you said very feasible, 38% said feasible, 15 were neutral, and 15 slightly feasible. So let's take a look at what senior living community leaders said. In our survey, operators acknowledged how critical it is for resident recruitment to use resident interest to personalize experiences. And they're right, because look to the right of the slide, family members' #2 reason they would not recommend a community is no opportunities for activities that match the elder's interests. Individually tailored experiences are one of the most important things a community can offer, but there's a gap in their ability to utilize personal information about each resident and make it actionable in order to provide these experiences. And you can see here on the bottom left, 62% of the operators are now saying it's even more difficult to deliver on that promise. So what are the opportunities for engagement technology to enhance the senior living experience? I've pointed to some along the way, but let me highlight 3 immediate areas that we leverage technology to impact loneliness and social isolation to benefit residents, maintain family and resident satisfaction, as well as positively impact occupancy. Opportunity number 1, create a camaraderie-rich community. And let me define camaraderie for you. Camaraderie is simply the ability to make a friend, and the friend is defined as someone who just has some shared or mutual interest in which the resident would want to engage with. There was a study put out, it was published by Asha Promachura in April of 2019, and it showed that camaraderie is the #1 business lever that a community can pull to positively affect business outcomes that matter most. And you can see the results on the bottom in the blue bar on this graphic. Camaraderie impacts whether a resident says that they feel at home in their community, if they're willing to recommend the community to others, if they feel that they have received value for their dollar, and if they would choose the community again if they had the opportunity to do so. And in their survey, only 20%, or 1 in 5 of residents, said that they had a strong sense of camaraderie or even a friend within the community. And their survey also extended to families, and families came up with the very same statistic. They felt like out of the seniors in senior living, of their family members, only 1 in 5 had a friend. And the primary reason residents don't feel at home in a community is loneliness. And many residents who were interviewed had said the same thing I found in my market work, that it was hard to make friends because they couldn't find people in their community with shared interests. Yet 50%, as you see on the right, of their reported willingness to recommend a community is impacted by camaraderie. Despite this importance, helping create these friendships is an area that most communities have few, if any, actual identified tactics on how they can address that. In fact, 43% of the community leaders in our survey seem to have a blind spot into the opportunity that technology has to help residents create social connections with one another. So we've got a situation in our industry where everyone agrees that friends and connections are critical for residents, but it seems like many senior living leaders haven't learned how technology can support residents in having thriving friendships within the community. They're prioritizing the idea of friends, but not necessarily looking to technology to help facilitate those friendships. The takeaway is that the communities that choose to use digital tools to help facilitate the formation of friendships will have a competitive edge in impacting both resident and family satisfaction, as well as families' willingness to recommend their community. So what would leveraging technology look like? To act on this opportunity, you want to view technology as really the connective tissue, if you will, within your community. During the pandemic, residents and staff have already shown that they can and will use technology in new ways if it serves the elders' personal unmet need, and it's easy to use by being purpose-built specifically for elders. Technology is the ideal facilitator for event-based and ongoing moments of social connection. Staff or residents can use technology to invite small groups, and I'm talking about both residents and staff to convene in person or virtually with their shared interest. And we think of connection as more than bringing people together. It can also be a way of fostering new relationships across their community by connecting residents to shared interests through targeted and interactive content. These interactions can be enhanced with specialized content that's built off the residents' common interest and ambitions of what they want to explore together, whether that be in art, music, painting, books. And so this brings us to our second opportunity. Create a senior living experience where personalized engagement is the norm. More than a third of family members, and you can see their responses in the gray bar, say that residents' community did not get to know the elder through personal time. Almost half of family members said they didn't get a move-in questionnaire. Now, this is a very interesting perception as their responses differ from what the community leaders report, and those are reported in the yellow bars. Only 23% of leaders say they don't do a move-in questionnaire, and only 7% say they don't use personal time to get to know individual residents. Whatever the practice, perception is reality, and gathering resident information is critical to setting up successful experiences within a community. So it kind of makes me wonder if it's because families receive an immense stack of papers to complete upon move-in that they aren't seeing the importance or the relevance of how that interest questionnaire will be used at the time they fill in. And possibly communities don't make it apparent on an ongoing basis how they are actually using that information. But it also leads me to question if communities have using this interest information built into their workflow so that it can be used on a daily basis when interacting with residents. And again, remember our survey question, we had 38% of you thought it was feasible, 33% very feasible. Let's look at what our data show. Here again is another blind spot that our survey really revealed regarding how to leverage technology for this challenging yet critical aspect of service and care. Only 24% of family members give top marks to the community's use of this information to tailor and to assist in picking activities and creating individualized experiences for the resident. Interestingly though, we saw before that 92% of the community leaders believe that using residents' background and interest is extremely or very important. But look at this graphic on the bottom. Only 33% say that it's very feasible to do so. So we clearly need to help these communities by leveraging technology. Solutions exist today that offer personalized tech-supported experiences. And from this data, we can see that it's more important than ever for activity professionals and other staff to find ways to customize possibilities at the person level versus just the one-size-fits-all that was so often commonplace with large group gatherings before the pandemic. So often we found that those activities were targeted, what I call kind of the midpoint level of interest among residents, hoping to appeal to all. But I think the question that we need to ask ourselves and really do self-reflection is, do these one-size-fit-all activities really have appeal? All right, well, if we're supposed to individualize, how can this be done? And you do need to have tools to be able to gather and use that information, not only based on past experiences, hobbies, and interests, but also on their hopes and aspirations for the now and the future. What have they always wanted to learn about or try? What knowledge or passions do they have to share that others might want to hear about? You know, what types of experiences would they consider to be interesting, meaningful, relevant? And what will inspire them to engage actively and enthusiastically versus passively spending time? Technology can facilitate gathering and using preference data without relying on what I often saw in the communities I referred to as the binder. These binders, honestly, they do hold such rich information, but the issue is they're most often found on a shelf. The key to being able to gather and use this information is making it actionable by integrating it into the workflow by all team members surrounding the elder. And this allows community staff to more easily match residents with each other and staff members based on similar and shared interests. And technology can help automate this process for even more efficiency and usability. And that brings us to our final opportunity. Create a senior living experience where residents have access to technology that enables connections. Staying connected to the world beyond the community is critical. Resident satisfaction with opportunities to socialize and connect with others outside the community dropped by 12% within the pandemic, and their dissatisfaction increased to 16%. And family satisfaction with the availability of these opportunities dropped by 25%. Yet again, I look at the scores of the residents prior to COVID precautions, and they weren't even glowing during that time. But as we've discussed, more elders had access to technology for connection provided during the pandemic. And it's imperative that this access continue, go forward, and is not just viewed as a pandemic intervention. Leverage the trends of increased tech adoption that has happened during the pandemic to increase access and empower residents with elder purpose-built technology. 46% of the residents, as you can see on the right, noted increased access to video calls with loved ones during the pandemic. So we have proof that technology makes it easy to provide much needed connection. Simple elder-friendly connection tools like video chat do wonders. Family interaction with photo sharing and messaging and encouraging them to interact on an ongoing basis. Content, where residents have interest matches and content suggestions at their fingertips to enable interactions with others, whether individual one-on-one or with small groups. And this means ensuring that residents without cognitive decline can connect independently, enabling them to choose how and when they want to engage. The key takeaway is access. Access to elder-friendly design that can be resident-driven and initiated as a matter of normal resident experience, pandemic and beyond. Let's wrap it up then by summarizing some key points this data has revealed and the opportunity it points to leverage technology in addressing social isolation and residents' loneliness and your community's reputation. Besides just being the important and right thing to do for resident health and wellness, in a tight and increasingly competitive market, it'll be critical for senior living communities to solve for meaningful socialization in order to attract new residents, maintain occupancy, and provide families the much needed proof points that they need for assurance. It's clear that effective relationship building and beneficial socialization are foundationally critical for residents' families' overall satisfaction. The pandemic has brought this challenge to the forefront, and it's helped us realize what we had not seen as issues before COVID with the clarity that we needed to. And it provides us the opportunities in front of us that we're able to focus on and capitalize on. Leveraging technology to innovate socialization initiatives, cultivate residents' relationships inside the community, and offer staff solutions to tailor aspects of the residents' experience. We certainly are excited about the future and where our collective efforts can have such meaningful benefits to residents' health and well-being, and to create a more satisfying experience for staff, as well as help communities stand out in a market that's becoming more competitive than ever before. INTL is always interested in the opportunity to collaborate with our community partners to work towards solutions. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your interest, for your attention. We'll turn it back over to Susan for Q&A. And I would invite my colleague, Allison Hart, who's the VP of Marketing at INTL, who led this market research effort, to join me as well.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Karen. That was really incredible. I really enjoyed the research that you shared. First of all, I should have known you were a nurse and that I would feel this instantaneous bond with you. And some of the way you presented some of the research that you discovered. So I have just a couple comments, and then we'll dive into some questions. I think something that you said is that social isolation was an issue before COVID. And that, I think the pandemic just brutally exposed and exacerbated an already bad situation. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that. And then something that you said that I thought was really powerful, it's not just about eliminating isolation, but it's about supporting connection and engagement. So in other words, I think there's been a lot of focus on the visitation bans and what that has done to really exacerbate loneliness. But it's not just a matter of saying, okay, people can come visit, because as I just said and you said, pre-pandemic, loneliness, isolation, that was an issue. So I think that's important. I'd like to now go into facilitating friendships and the camaraderie that you described. You gave us some tactics and some opportunities, and really you talked about personal engagement and the need to really highly individualize this. So I love what you talked about when you said the binder. And I know that binder. I think anybody who's ever spent any time in senior living, we know the binder. So talk to me about perhaps some strategies that really make that binder more actionable. Are there some things that you have seen in your experience or as you were doing the research that some communities were able to do it better than others?
Yeah, it's a great question, Susan. I appreciate that. I'll tell you, the culmination of almost a year of our market research in 2019, actually with phone calls as well as the visits that we talked about, really resulted in the fact that we called it the dead end. And the opportunity in senior living is there is all this information that's collected in the sales discovery process, as well as in, typically the first 30 days when someone moves in with their interests, et cetera. But how do you make it actionable at the point of service? And so, there are some things that we have leveraged our technology to date with the fact that you can set up individual profiles on the tablet, for instance, and be able to set up then favorites for the resident select them themselves based on what their interests are. And we are going to take our technology further this year to be able to do a better job for communities in terms of being able to take what's collected on the intake and be able to then automate that process. Because one of the things we want to do is really focus on staff efficiency and be able to then just put it at their fingertips, if you will, to be able to do that. But I think the key is at the point of when you're collecting it, and it's going to go in that binder, where in your community today are you identifying what needs to be done on a daily basis for the resident? And jot a couple of those things down. One of the things that's interesting about the introduction that Jack did today, and I do this with executives now when I talk with them, you do the professional intro, right? And we all say what it is, and that's what happens in our communities. I'm staff so-and-so, and this is what I'm here to do today. But what if we said two, my team hates this, but I call them like know-me nuggets, is that what if you said, I love to travel all over the world and I'm a humanitarian photographer. Now, suddenly you're going to start talking to me about something potentially that we now know about one another. So I would say that's the other thing, is that when you collect the information about the resident, is to be sharing that, and don't make it extensive. Don't make it complicated. Take a couple of things and suddenly you're making connections with each other as people. And it's these conversation starters that really lead to connection and engagement and friendships where they make sense.
That was beautifully said, and I instantaneously wanted to have a conversation with you about your photography. So that's absolutely very true. You made a comment earlier about residents' receptivity to technology. So in your career, how have you seen it change so that, and especially now during COVID, I think we've all, here we are are all on Zoom. And I think we have all kind of adapted to be able to do more with technology. But what have you seen during the pandemic with regards to receptivity and technology?
Yeah, thank you. I'll speak to that at a kind of a national global level, and then what we've seen at IN2L as well. And certainly the immediate need was we've got to do video calls, right? All over the country, everyone was trying to figure out how to do that. And that was really important. And the research has shown that video calls are, in terms of the impact on the individual, are the second best thing to in-person visits. Different than social media, than emails, than anything else. That if we can have people connect. I think the surprising thing was the fact that, and I think surprising even to senior living community operators and staff, were that seniors would learn how to do that because it met a need. It met such a visceral, unmet need that had to happen at the time. Now, they had to download apps and people had to connect, and the staff time that it took, I've heard in communities that took a full FTE to just run around and connect people to video calls. We think at IN2L it shouldn't be that hard. You know, the one-touch video call was fundamental for us to release this year immediately upon COVID because of those barriers. But I think the takeaway, Susan, is that the access piece. I've talked with communities that have shared with me, they said, oh, we're glad we're coming out of this, that we can put this aside now.
Yes,
we
thank
don't
you.
need to do that. And that's my message is you can't put that aside. The new reality, whether there was ageism there, whether there were technology barriers or whatever, but we need to understand that this has to be a normal part of daily life where an elder has connection with technology that they can use, that, you know, I called it elder purpose built, that is simple for them to use, that they don't have to even know that they're now having to need to use technology. What's important is I can call my daughter that I haven't spoken to in 2 weeks, you know, and I can see her face. And I think that that's critically important. So please make sure that your seniors have, you know, senior purpose built technology, and don't take it away when it ends, and support them in utilizing it. And I think you'll find staff efficiency will go up instead of go the other way. Satisfaction in everyone's job will be higher, and just health, wellness, and happiness can be the norm.
Well, and you kind of segued to the next question I had was around, you said empowered staff. And this is why IN2L and Greenhouse gets along so well, because that's one of our core values, and really staff empowerment. And so it sounds like, and you just kind of said it, you tied it to staff satisfaction in putting tools in the hands of staff to be able to facilitate friendships and to really make some things happen. So are there strategies for leaders outside of making sure you've got the technology, but any strategies that you have seen leaders do that were especially effective in that staff empowerment piece and making sure that information in the binder got translated into really practical ways?
Yeah, I touched on at the beginning when I was talking about those, you know, what are the couple of things that someone might not know about you that you could share right away? But it's not just the residents, it's the staff as well to be able to do that. And one of the really powerful, cool things that I heard from a parent organization in their communities is they actually are incentivizing their staff to have like 1-hour sessions a week where they offer opportunities for the resident to be able to participate with them on something that they love. So, you know, if it was me, I would do a photography class. Right. And then the point is they said, and don't stop. That was the other lesson that they learned, is that once you start something like this, then we start to, you know, put boundaries around it. But then what if they want to do a gallery show? What if they want to, you know, take pictures? They don't just want to sit passively in a class. You know, let these things take life. But I think the empowerment of the staff to come in and to do what they want to do, and that is share of themselves in a way that makes a difference to elders' lives.
I love that. I think what they want to do, and what they want to do is make a difference.
Yeah.
And to, empowered staff means better life for elders, and it's making a difference. I love that. I'm going to invite Marla on to our call. We do have some questions in the Q&A box, and I don't want to dominate the time, but this is fascinating. So Marla, what have we got?
Well, I'll start with a comment, which comes from an activity director at the Ave Maria Greenhouse Homes. And she said, we have 8 IN2L units. They've been a lifesaver during COVID. Our elders' average age is 80 to 85, and they're like the Jetsons using video chat, and they love it. They now have 3 tablets for assisted living. Thought that was a great comment.
A nice testimonial.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. That makes my day. Appreciate that.
So there are a few different questions. So the first one is, how do you deal with the fact that some long-term care communities ban cameras for family members? I think there's concern about monitoring the work that staff do. So in terms of trying to get that engagement through technology, if some organizations are not allowing that.
So I actually haven't run across a situation myself, but again, I'm not in the customer support side of the house, but that has not been raised to me. One of the things that in my job as Vice President of Product Management is, what are the problems that are out there in the marketplace that we can help solve? And that's an interesting one, because I haven't, in terms of video chat, I've heard it in terms of security in the rooms and that type of things, but in terms of video chat, I have not heard that as a barrier to being able to utilize that. So I don't know if others might want to comment on the chat around that, but I'm sorry that I don't have, I don't have an experience how people have overcome that, because I haven't heard that issue.
Okay. We'll see if anything comes in the chat. In general, and your observations, are facilities needing to increase their infrastructure within to accommodate the access, or is what they have with infrastructure already there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's important. And I think that probably everybody on the call is in a great position to be able to respond, because we see the spectrum is tremendous, right? There are people that have really addressed, it's a broadband issue, right? And do you have Wi-Fi capability throughout your community? Do you have it in, we've certainly seen in some communities, they had it just in their large activity room. And suddenly now when they moved over to, the different little cubbies where they tried to get smaller groups, or certainly within their elders' rooms, that they didn't have broadband. So I think that that is something that the industry has acknowledged that, I read something the other day, it's even nationally, the broadband access, in homes and in lower socioeconomic places, that it's really time that we face broadband like electricity, right? It's something that you are significantly disadvantaged in just staying healthy and well if you don't have that. So I do think that the industry is in a critical point right now in recognizing that issue and working to resolve it.
So this is kind of a related question. How can tech companies help? What's your message for them?
Tech companies overall help, I think, by making sure that we are developing technology that is really solving the market problems. The reason that we spent, myself and my team, a year out in the field in 2019 was really making sure we understood the workflow issues. We understood the issues from the resident perspective, the staff perspective, et cetera. And don't just put features out, but do an end-to-end solution for people to be able to really hit the outcomes that you're after. So what we're looking at with our technology is, ease of use. I mean, we just did a brand new tablet UI based on everything I observed that was a stumbling block for seniors. And we just want to knock those all out of the way, right? And be able to just make it easier for them to do what's important, and for us to focus our attention on the things that matter most and have the greatest impact and the greatest outcome.
Nice. I like the barrier busting attitude. So a couple questions related to different populations. So first of all, elders or persons with cognitive impairments or with different degrees of decline. And then there's a similar question about persons that have had strokes and can't hold a phone but are mentally sharp. So what technology can be used without labor, that's not labor intensive for staff?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd go back to the person who is cognitively not impaired, but has some physical mobility issues. And that is, so for instance, our tablet just works on a kickstand, so they don't have to be holding that, et cetera. It is a touch. We have styluses that can be used, when fingertips don't work, et cetera. I think enabling voice-enabled technology is really important. We're looking to solve that this year as well without having to have additional devices, but be able to just use your voice, et cetera. So that's another area that we hope to make significant progress there. And then I think for those that are cognitively impaired anywhere along the variable that it can be, it is a staff-led model, right? That's how we see that effectively utilized within a community. But again, it makes the staff job so much easier. So we think about it as a proactive tool. When you know that someone has behavioral expressions for certain activities of daily life, then utilize those soothing and calming things, those content items that are there, flag those as the residents' favorites, and everybody's day is off to the better start and smoother, et cetera. So again, it is a staff-led model where the staff is initiating those things, but the benefits to staff and the resident are great because of that.
Nice. Got one last one. So certainly when I first heard about IN2L, it was in congregate living in nursing homes. But we all have acknowledged that isolation and loneliness is happening in our community as well at large. So the question is, can this technology be deployed in a person's private home in the community? Are you getting into that area? How is that going?
Yeah, thank you, Marla, for that question. We actually started rolling out to significant home programs last year. So in June, we moved into the home, and we do that in partnership with some communities as well as other larger organizations. And we have two models. One is a model for the independent older senior who needs technology to help them connect, and they don't have that. The second is family caregivers of family members with dementia. So again, giving them a tool in the toolkit, and we're doing research on that. We have a PhD researcher who's joined our staff and is also doing research on the outcomes that we're able to affect in terms of caregiver wellness, as well as the elder wellness and impact on loneliness. So super excited to see the results of that as it comes out, but it is definitely a big piece of our future. And we're excited to be able to extend these capabilities for those outside of a senior living community.
Wonderful. That's all I got.
Thanks, Marla. And Karen, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time today and your wisdom, and more than that, your passion. I mean, it really is very clear to me that you are driven by that desire to make a difference and to let technology be kind of that tool to really facilitate friendships, camaraderie, and that highly individualized support that is essential to our health and well-being. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate it. It's a privilege, and I really appreciate the opportunity as well.
Well, our gratitude to IN2L once again. And we will have IN2L back, not on the next session, but the one after that. It's called Connected and Engaged. And Janet, let's go to kind of the next slide, which will talk about our next session, which will be Dr. Al Power. And he is really, let me get living with risk and finding the balance. And we've talked so much about social isolation and the difference between social isolation and loneliness. And Dr. Power is going to talk to us and really unpack the upside downside of risk, and really take a look at risk head on and help us figure out what the right balance is. On the next slide, this is the one that IN2L will come back with a panel, and Jack York is going to moderate a discussion, and those users of IN2L, you know, what have we learned and how has technology supported that level of engagement and connection, especially during COVID lockdowns. And in light of the conversation and the research that was done by IN2L, it will be incredibly important for you. You'll want to hear that as well. Next slide. This is our greenhouse project design series. We've got some design series coming up sponsored by Perkins Eastman, and you'll see those dates to the left of your slides there, but really taking a look at the design principles of greenhouse and human-centered design, the front door, the house and home, dignity, privacy, and choice. And next slide. Last but not least, I'd love for you to take a listen to Elevate Elder Care, the Greenhouse Projects podcast. I have been able to sit down with some of the most remarkable thought leaders in our field to really understand more deeply what we must do collectively to elevate elder care. I want to thank everybody for your time today. You will get a link to this recording and the research that was done by It's Never Too Late. And as always, I challenge you to go beyond better in 2021, and let's collectively make a difference, and let's collectively really inspire and encourage each other to go the distance and go beyond better. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.